Hi guys, hope you're keeping well today. My name's Andrew from smartgardenguide.com and this video is all about how to care for this houseplant here. So this is Stromanthe Triostar, or as it's sometimes called, Calathea Triostar. It is one of my favourite houseplants. It's an absolute stunner. It's a bit of a challenge to look after, but it's well worth the effort. So I'm going to go through all the different aspects of care that you need to provide for this plant to keep it healthy. And I'm also going to cover some of the common problems and how you can get around them, how you can prevent them or fix them as they crop up. So first of all, the name of this plant is actually, it's a cultivated variety of Stromanthe sanguinea. So it's called Stromanthe sanguinea Triostar. It originates from Brazil originally, much like a lot of other prayer plants from the Stromanthe, Maranta, Calathea, Ctenathe genuses. This is, as I mentioned, a type of prayer plant. So it's got this lovely feature where the leaves fold up at night time and then they come back down and droop in the daytime. So it's constantly moving, it's constantly changing, and it's a really interesting plant. And if that isn't enough, the leaves are also completely unique and they're variegated with this dark green on the front of the leaves with streaks of white or cream, and then the underside of the leaves are this lovely sort of maroony red color. So it really is fantastic. It's a beautiful houseplant, and I've owned a number of them over the last few years. So we're going to kick things off just talking about light for this plant. So this is a plant that originated in the understory of tropical forests. So it doesn't like direct sunlight. It likes sort of medium to bright indirect light. So place it in your home somewhere where it's close to a window, but it's not really getting any direct sunlight. Keep an eye on it over the first few weeks whenever you get it. If you see that it's getting more than an hour or two of direct sunlight, move it so that it's shielded from that direct sunlight, or move it a little bit further away from the window. But sort of indirect sunlight isn't too hard to get indoors. What you probably need to be careful about though is providing enough light for this plant. So if you put it in a dark corner or in a hallway or something, it's not going to grow very quickly at all, and it might become quite sparse over time. So I think this plant really shines when it keeps quite a dense growth habit, but in low light conditions it can become quite sparse, and it can lose some leaves and it can start to look a little bit worse for wear. So just make sure the lighting's quite bright for it. Watering is probably the most important aspect of care, either that or humidity, but we'll cover watering first. So Stromanthe Triostar really likes continually lightly moist soil. So this means that whenever the surface of the soil starts to feel dry, you should water it. You should water it thoroughly, but you should make sure that the soil doesn't end up soggy after you've watered it. So you need to make sure that you've planted your plant in a pot with plenty of drainage holes. You need to make sure that you drain the excess water after you water it really thoroughly before you put it back on its drip tray or in its decorative pot, because if you leave it in soggy soil, you'll end up with root rot, and that's one of the problems with this plant. It is prone to root rot, and it's because the roots are very delicate. They're not particularly fast growing roots, and they're really thin, really fine roots, so really prone to problems. So lightly moist soil is the way to go with this one. In terms of the soil itself, well, because you want the soil to retain a little bit of moisture, you probably want to start with like either a peat or a cocoa coir based soil with a reasonable amount of organic material in it. Now you can certainly make your own soil with maybe 50 to 60% peat or cocoa coir, add in a bit of compost or worm castings, and throw in maybe 25% perlite or pumice to improve drainage. Alternatively, most commercial houseplant soils are probably going to be suitable for this plant. What I might do is add a little bit of extra perlite or pumice to any commercial general purpose houseplant mix, just to improve the drainage and to stop your soil from becoming waterlogged. Commercial soils don't tend to have any problem holding onto water, but where they probably fall down is in their drainage properties often. In terms of temperature, just normal indoor temperatures will be fine for Stromanthe Triostar. They tend to like things more towards the upper end of indoor temperature ranges. So once things fall below about 60 Fahrenheit, they can run into problems. But you're generally aiming for around about 65 to 80 Fahrenheit, or about 16 to 27 degrees Celsius, which I think that covers most people's indoor temperatures. The next thing we'll cover actually is humidity, because this is crucial to keeping the plant looking well. Stromanthe Triostars, they need at least moderate and ideally high humidity. So we're talking at least 50% humidity levels. And if humidity is too low in your home, this plant will get brown tips, it will get brown edges, and it will get brown patches on the leaves. And they'll get worse over time, and the plant will start to look, worse and worse as time. The next thing we're going to discuss is fertilizing your Stromanthe Triostar. So there are a few things that you can do. The first and probably the easiest one is to add some compost or worm castings into your potting mix when you're planting your Calathea Triostar. This will provide a steady stream of nutrients that your plant can use over time. However, if you don't repot your plant for a few years, or if the nutrient content of the soil that you're using is quite low, you are going to need to fertilize it eventually. And I usually fertilize this with just a balanced fertilizer every 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks during the spring and summer when it's actively growing. And then I don't fertilize it at all over the winter. I'm always really careful when I'm fertilizing my Stromanthe Triostar, because it's very sensitive to nutrient burn. So if you add too much, or you add a fertilizer that's too concentrated, it will cause leaf damage and even root damage, and it can really negatively impact the health of your plant. So take it really easily. Like, I make my fertilizer up to about 1/4 of the strength that you would make up for a plant growing outside. That's if you're using a general purpose fertilizer. Next thing we'll have a chat about is pruning. Thankfully, Stromanthe Triostar really doesn't need an awful lot of pruning. Just the old foliage will die off over time. So you'll get the odd leaf that turns brown or shrivels, and just cutting these off at the base is the thing to do. And interestingly, this plant, it grows from a rhizome, so the stems grow directly up from the soil. So they do. So there's an underground stem called a rhizome, and the roots grow down from that. And over time, new shoots will be sent up from this rhizome. They'll emerge directly from the soil. So the way to prune it is just prune them off pretty much at the where they emerge from the soil. In terms of propagating Stromanthe Triostar, this is dead easy. Just wait until it's really root bound, until you definitely need to repot it, and then just take it out of the pot, and you can actually divide the rhizome and split the plant into 2 separate plants, or actually even more plants. You could divide the rhizome into 3 or 4 pieces if you've got a particularly large plant. I wouldn't recommend dividing your plant too often. I definitely would wait until it is root bound and really needs repotted, because they don't like being repotted. They can suffer a wee bit after being repotted, just because the roots are so sensitive, and it'll take them a wee while to bed into their new pot. So just wait until it needs it, and then you can either repot. Well, you can repot, and then you can divide the rhizome if you want at that time. In terms of problems with this plant, the first thing is diseases and pests. Well, diseases, the most common thing you're going to run into is problems with overwatering. So if you overwater this plant, if you grow it in soggy soil, it is going to be at high risk of developing bacterial and fungal infections that damage the roots, the stems, or the leaves themselves. So if you avoid overwatering it, you'll avoid most disease problems. In terms of pests, I mean, they're not particularly prone to pests. The one problem I've had with Stromanthe Triostar has actually been spider mites. This wasn't the original plant that I was planning to do this video with. I had a really enormous Stromanthe Triostar that I absolutely loved, and I've been growing for about 3 or 4 years. It was huge and I'd taken fairly good care of it. But a few months ago, maybe I hadn't been paying attention, but I went in and I noticed that the leaves were in really bad condition, and it just had a really awful case of spider mites. Most of the foliage was affected. So to save that plant, I would have had to prune off an awful lot of the foliage. I really would have been left with a plant around about this size anyway, and I think it would have been tough for it to recover. So unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough to save that plant, and I had to get rid of it and get another one. So, oh dear. So spider mites, they are a tricky pest to deal with at the best of times because they're very small, so you can overlook them, but generally you should, on a regular basis, check the foliage, check the front and the back of the foliage for any signs of pests, and then take immediate action and isolate any affected plant from any other houseplants that you have. Other problems, obviously I've alluded to it already, and that is foliage problems, brown tips on the leaves, brown edges, brown patches, and these are used, well, any source of stress, any deficiency in care will definitely cause brown patches on the leaves of your Stromanthe Triostar. I actually did another video about causes of brown leaves and houseplants that you might want to watch. This sort of goes through things in a lot more detail, but you're just going to have to go through each aspect of care individually to try and work out what's causing the problem with your Stromanthe Triostar. Certainly watering problems and humidity would be the first places to look, but drafts, temperature problems, fertilizer, over-fertilizing, are other common problems. And if you just go through things really carefully one by one, you'll hopefully find out what is causing the brown leaves on your Stromanthe Triostar. Overall, this is a plant that I absolutely adore. As I say, it's not an easy houseplant to keep in perfect condition, but I think that's why I like it, because it's a real challenge. Whenever there is a problem, it takes a bit of detective work to find out what's going wrong with your plant, and it's really rewarding then to make a few adjustments and then to see new foliage coming through that's perfect. And it's quite interesting, it's quite nice the way that the new foliage does come through, because they emerge obviously from the rhizome at the soil level, and they grow up tightly curled, and slowly over the course of a week or two they'll unfurl, and you get to see whether this next leaf is in good condition or whether you've maybe haven't been doing as good a job as you thought you were. If you've got any questions about looking after Stromanthe Triostar, please leave them down below. Similarly, if you've got any comments you'd like to make about how you've got on with your plant, or any tips for me or for anyone else who's watching this video, please leave them below, because we're all trying to learn and get a wee bit better at looking after our plants. And if you've enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I'm planning to put out plenty more videos for you guys over the next while, all about looking after houseplants and keeping them looking great. Thanks very much, guys. All the best. Bye now. Bye.